Hello chess friends and welcome to your out of chess channel and welcome back to the Sinquefield Cup in 2022. So we're following now a very important game of the super event. We're following now the world champion Magnus Carlsen against Hans Niemann. Both of these players had 1/2 points after the first two rounds, so they were the leaders of the super event, and Magnus Carlsen had, I think, here a great chance maybe to take be the sole leader after the first three rounds. But Hans Niemann had, I think, also something to say in this game. Hans Niemann is becoming stronger and stronger, I think, and we have to say it. Hans Niemann is only 19 years old, and I really love this guy because he's giving such funny comments on YouTube. I always love his interviews. I enjoy when he's making fun of about chess. It's really, I think, a refreshment to watch Hans Niemann playing, but also, of course, then later giving comments about his games, but also about the games of others. So let's see now what happened. It was a remarkable, but also tough game between the two of them. So let's see now what happened. So d4 was played by the world champion Magnus. Knight to f6 by Niemann, c4, e6, knight to c3, bishop to b4. We have the Nimzo Indian defense on the board. So many things can be played. So you can, I think, always separate the Nimzo Indian in two ways. Even one of the ways is, of course, to challenge somehow the Darko bishop on b4, or you just leave it like this and play different ideas. Then you're trying to maybe some ideas of f3, e4 or something, or you're trying, I don't know, maybe queen to c2, but at least you're not challenging this bishop on b4. I think we should always watch the Nimzo like this. So Magnus plays now this idea. He's saying, if you want to double up my pawn structure, do it, but at least I'm developing faster. I'm just developing my pieces here. If you want to take it, then of course I have a beautiful bishop here that would cross all over the board. So in the continuation, we have now kingside castling, bishop to g2. We have now the move d5 here by Hans Niemann, and now a3. Now finally Magnus is challenging now the bishop. We have bishop to c3. After b takes c3, we have now the move d takes c4, and this move order is really good for black. I think black has, of course, lost the bishop pair, but we have to say this bishop is a little bit paralyzed by its own pawn structure. Even if you play here something like bishop to g5, if you use it in the most active way, you will eventually get challenged with the move h6, and then you have to make a reaction. You will probably have to trade it off for the knight, and then you don't have the strength of the bishop pair anymore. So I think here the Darko bishop on c1 is not the most aggressive piece on the board. On the other hand, we have to say this bishop is perfectly fine, but you have to now recapture also the pawn on c4. If black manages somehow to defend the pawn with c6, b5, maybe a6, bishop to b7 setups, then black should be slightly better. So you have to take care now of the c4 pawn. You cannot tolerate, of course, this extra pawn situation of black. So we have now the move knight to f3 by Magnus, perfectly fine, and now c5. I love here really Hans Niemann's approach. He wasn't really scared in this game against Magnus. He didn't respect him too much. I think we should always respect our opponents, but not too much. You just play your game and hope for the best, of course. Magnus was, of course, the top favorite in this event, and especially in this game, I think he is, of course, the favorite. But with the move c5 here, Niemann is also showing that he's not tolerating any aggressive play by Magnus Carlsen. So kingside castling play by Magnus. We have now c takes d4. Also an interesting idea is maybe to develop further with the move knight to c6, because even if white takes now the pawn on c5, it doesn't matter. This scenario will never happen, because look at this, these three pawns are really disconnected, so it's simply two weakened pawn structure. Many times white will simply keep the small pawn chain with c3 d4, will not allow here to take. In my opinion, maybe knight to c6 is more aggressive, but now after move c takes d4, here Magnus hoped now to liberate finally the long diagonal for the light square bishop, because if you play now queen to d4, then of course knight to d4 is going to happen. And the problem is now after move knight to d5, there is a cool line knight to b5 here. a6, you see, can be met with bishop to d5. Then if you take, of course, then we have this one knight to c7. It's really an unpleasant move. Rook to a7. Look at this, bishop to e3 is going to happen. So that's why you, after move queen to d4, you should not allow your opponent to get with this knight with the tempo. If that happens, as we said, the main strength of this setup is coming out, then the light square bishop is becoming, of course, the monstrous bishop, the best piece on the board. So after move queen to d4, knight to c6 was finally played by Hans Niemann. We have queen to c4. Okay, Magnus has the pawn back, but we have to notice here that something changed in this position. Now there are several structural weaknesses. This is an isolated pawn, this is an isolated pawn. I think when we watch the game a little bit here from Black's perspective, Black hasn't lost, of course, the bishop pair, but has, I think, a decent compensation in this messed up pawn structure here of White. So in the continuation, we have now e5 by Hans Niemann. This is also a cool move because there was simply no better way to get out with this bishop. Of course, a6 b5 methods are not working because you are always vulnerable to this attacks. b6, as we said here, you get simply queen takes c6, so you cannot really push anything here. So that's why with the move e5, at least this bishop is coming out. So we have now bishop to g5, and now the fun starts. So we have now the move h6 here. As we said, when you develop the bishop on g5, you will probably be challenged, because with this fianchetto setup, you're always playing the move g3. You cannot play bishop to h4 because your bishop gets trapped. So when you get out with your bishop in these structures, you have to then make a reaction. In the continuation, Magnus tried rook from f to d1, and many of us, I think, would play some ideas of queen to c7 retreat or something. But here I like to really, again, Hans Niemann's approach. He said, "I'm not scared of you, dude. I'm just playing beautiful sharp chess." Here he played a beautiful counterattack, and that's a must move. If you play any other move, then you're just on the passive side. Now with the move bishop to e6, he hopes for a clarification, and now finally the bishop is out. The bishop was stuck many times in Catalan structures. In these types of structures, the bishop is sometimes stuck on the 8th rank. Now with the move bishop to e6, it comes out with the tempo. We have rook to d8, bishop to e6, also taking out the queen. Magnus also takes out the rook, but now also Hans Niemann takes out here the rook. So we have now bishop to f6, and after g takes f6, maybe this was Magnus Carlsen's idea, maybe this was his whole plan, but I think here that he messed up already the position. This is the wrong plan, because okay, we can say this is also a messed up pawn structure, because Black has also an isolated pawn here on h6 and has now a double pawn structure here on the f file. But I think Magnus Carlsen's pawn structure is much worse, especially because of these two isolated pawns. These are huge weaknesses. I'm not sure how White will attack any of these pawns, so even if they're weaknesses, I think in the near future we can play f5, e4. So these pawns are three combined together, they will roll in the center of the board. I hope you know what I mean, you know, because maybe it is a structural weaknesses, but this structural weaknesses, I think, would be a huge weakness where there will be maybe still the queen on the board, because the queen of course could sneak in on the f5 square and then deliver some checks. But without the queens, this is a much worse position, I think, here for Magnus, especially because of this possibility to get these three pawns connected and let them roll. As I said, just let them storm here in the center of the board. b6 will be played in one particular moment if, for instance, you get challenged here on b file. You can even try bishop to a6 protected. So it's much harder, I think, for Magnus to defend the c3 pawn and also the a3 pawn than maybe Black to defend his weaknesses in the position. So something went wrong, I think, here for Magnus. He messed up, I think, the position. It's not the losing position immediately, but I think it's really uncomfortable now to play the game. So in the continuation, Magnus has to also lose the tempo. King to f1, because the pawn on e2 is hanging. Also, very important thing to say, because now Hans Niemann is taking over of the only open file of the open d file. So it's, as I said, something went wrong here really for the world champion Magnus Carlsen. Magnus goes king to e1. We have now knight to a5, and now you just play something like b6. You get out of the range of the light square bishop. So this is also a beautiful method. You're not allowing any ideas here of the light square bishop. The light square bishop is then aiming into air. It's aiming then into nothing. So into continuation, we have rook to d1, we have rook to c8, we have knight to d2, and now bishop to e6, keeping the pieces really compact. You see now, I'm not sure if we should call this a structural weakness, because the bishop is compact here. We will play f5, we will play e4, so the pawns are rolling. So I really love now here Black's position. We have knight c4, we have bishop to c4, knight takes c4, and now after rook to c4, Magnus hoped for this scenario where he could maybe attack here the b7 pawn, but also the f7 pawn. But Hans Niemann again played beautiful defensive moves. He regrouped rook to c7, very important move to keep the rook on the 7th rank, where of course most of your pawns are. And now after a move rook to a8, a6, simply getting out of this mess, rook to b8, and now f5. So see, Hans Niemann has an extra pawn, has now defended this position, has now the opportunity to include the king into the game, and basically black is here, in my opinion, much better. So in the continuation, we have rook to e8, we have e4, and now g4 here, played by Magnus Carlsen. This was risky. Okay, you are trying to split the pawn chain, but actually here you have to, I think, admit your mistake here. You just play rook to d8 and hope to get maybe the king into the game, maybe to do this path, maybe get the king to f4. This would be at least some kind of idea. But Magnus tried again to be aggressive here with the move g4. Hans Niemann simply attacked the bishop. We have bishop to a2, and now knight to c4. So trying maybe sort of this scenario, bishop to c4, rook to c4, then you can maybe take. But now look at this with b5. If you try maybe to attack the pawn, then you get this one, and this should be again much better for black. We just take the pawn, and one of the main ideas of this endgames, rook and pawn endgames, is to create two connected passers. If you do that in this way, for instance, if you manage to get this kind of a position, this is simply winning here for black. So this is not good also for Magnus Carlsen. So after move knight to c4, Magnus didn't want to simplify the game by trading off the minor pieces. He tried a4, blocking the potential b5 move. b5 is still an opportunity, but if that happens, then of course we can trade it off. We can then play a takes b5, and then black will never have the ability, of course, to connect two passers on the a and b file. So a4 is a sort of an idea to not allow aggressive play here on the queen side. So we have now knight to d6 by Hans Niemann, rook to e7, attacking the pawn on b7, f takes g4, and now a rook to d7, now attacking also the knight on d6. So now an interesting idea by Hans Niemann. He plays e3. This is really cool, I think, because he's saying this pawn is weak anyway, so I want to at least give it up and mess up further your pawn structure. Now I have a beautiful square for my knight. So this was, I think, the best move of Hans Niemann's in the game. It was really cool how he played the game without any calculations, without any further retreatments. He continued to play aggressively here. e3, really beautiful move. So f takes e3, knight to e4. We have king to f1. Let's see now. This rook and the knight are combining really good attacking chances here. In the continuation, you have to step back and look at this. This bishop is lined up. We have this one as a weakness. The bishop is hanging, so already again a messed up position here for Magnus. So bishop to f7. It doesn't matter because Magnus got challenged in this way. Rook to e2, king to g1. Again, a couple of checks, and now the king is getting into the center. Now black's king is much more active. So okay, Magnus can of course take out this pawn, but knight to g5 is going to happen, and then things get really unpleasant because there is also this annoying check, knight to f3. For instance, if you get here to h1, then you can even get checkmated in some occasions with the rook and the knight. So it's still unpleasant to play the game. In the continuation, after move king to f6, Magnus played bishop to d5, attacking now the knight, but here Hans Niemann played the pin, is not allowing now Magnus to take out the knight. So rook to f7, king to g6, and Magnus maybe had here some opportunities to force at least somehow this position, to make a draw at least, but he made now, I think, the crucial mistake. He played now the move rook to d7, and this is not working because you have to play here rook to e7. You have to counterplay. In these types of endgames, I think it's very important to trade off the minor pieces. Maybe the outcome would be something that black could be maybe with an extra pawn in the continuation of the endgame, but here you have to, I think, go for this, because after rook to d5 we take also this one. Black is of course much more active with the king, but now with the move h3 we can, I think, here at least force this line. We're getting closer with the king, and now you look at this is now weak pawn. Maybe here there is a situation 2 versus 1, but still I think Magnus with his endgame skills could hold the position. But as we said, instead of this move rook to e7, he played now rook to d7. The problem is now here knight to g5. So here in this continuation Hans Niemann get out of this attack of the bishop and stays now with the knight on the board, which is very important. He didn't want to trade up further pieces. He realized his chances with some annoying checks of knight to h3 or knight to f3. So we have now bishop to f7, a check, the rook is attacked. We have here this one, king to f5. Of course, if you take, then you get this beautiful fork on f3, and that's exactly what happened. We have here king to g2 and now knight to d2. So let's stop and evaluate now the position of this particular endgame. So obviously, again, black is much better because black is of course up a pawn, but this is again a weakness, and the main strength is here this 2 versus 1 situation with the support of the knight. We have also here this 2 versus 1 situation, so as I said, something went wrong here. Black should be winning. So we have here a5, very important move by Magnus, keeping the pawns on light squares where the bishop can attack of the course the pawns, and then maybe take it then afterwards one, then after another. But then of course still black has activities with the king, then take out this pawn, go further for this one. Also we have to notice black has also some chances if Magnus plays the endgame incorrectly, of course, then we can also take out the pawn on a5. So it's really hard for now for white to make progress in the game. So in the continuation, king to e5, king to g3, knight to f1, a check. We have knight to king to f2, knight takes h2. So you see Magnus lost now a very important distant pass pawn now on the h file. A better idea instead of this move king to f2 was simply to take out the pawn, but again knight to h2, then you have to play king to g3, again knight to f1. Really unpleasant game again here for the world champion Magnus Carlsen. So in the continuation, as we said, king to f2, here Hans Niemann took. We have here e4, king to e4. Now the bishop is coming into the game, but seems simply too slow. Now Magnus goes for the pawns, but it's simply, as we said, it's too slow. We have knight to f3, bishop to b7, now knight to e5. Here Magnus takes another pawn, now knight to c6. He'll eventually take out this one, and this is game over. We have bishop to b7, Hans Niemann took out this one, simply push the pawn further, h4, bishop to d5, and after king to e5 in this position, Magnus Carlsen resigns. There is simply no way anymore to defend this position. One pawn could be handled, of course, because the bishop could be sacrificed for one of these pawns, but when there are two of them, it's not working. You will sacrifice the bishop for one, but then of course black will continue the game with the knight and the pawn, and it's game over. Unbelievable game. Magnus Carlsen lost against Hans Niemann. Incredible story it is. I'm not sure what happened to the world champion. I think he missed something in the opening. He allowed the structural weaknesses, got really weak position, made crucial mistakes. This is not the world champion that we know. Of course, he'll probably improve his game in the later stage of the tournament, but still an interesting win. And now Hans Niemann is the leader of this super event. Congratulations to Hans Niemann. He deserved this win. I think he played a really cool game. Interesting ideas he produced here. Played really aggressively, which is also very important. I really love this move e3, where he messed up the pawn structure, included the knight into the game. Really stunning stuff. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. Really interesting ideas here by Hans Niemann. He's now the top favorite maybe to win the whole thing. I wish him all of the best. I always love to see when newcomers, when new players can win such huge events, because chess has to evolve, chess has to make progress, and Hans Niemann has now really good chances in this super event. So okay, see you soon with some more videos, and what to say, chess is the best, of course.